So I've got some Santa Ana Madeira Citrine and some Bahia Citrine. Santa Ana Madeira, Bahia, and I'll cut one of each. I'll cut this one and this one, and see what they look like once we cut them. Okay, so let's see what our two citrine pieces of rough look like. First, the Madeira, Santa Ana Madeira Citrine. We put it into the refractol. I see an inclusion, but it's pretty near the surface. You can see it there on the right hand side as you look, little black inclusion there. It's not, doesn't go very far into the stone. And other than that, I see a couple of tiny surface inclusions. So I think we're okay with this stone. It should be able to facet internally flawless gemstone. Second, let's look at the Bahia Citrine that also came from Brazil. And you see a little, you can see right there on the surface on the left hand side, little black, that's an inclusion, but it's, see it now, it's on the right hand side, but it's right at the surface, so that will be easily ground away during the faceting. Other than that, this stone is internally clean as well. So that's how we use our refractol. So I'll get these stones cleaned up. What I do to clean them up is I just used Dawn dishwasher detergent, rinse them off, degreaser because the refractol is a little bit greasy, and then we'll put them onto the transfer jigs. So now to pick a design. I've had a lot of luck recently finding interesting designs by looking at the various faceting guild or faceting club websites. So here's a design from the Australian Faceters Guild website called Dilemma. The guild has modified the design, the original design by F.F. Dunbar. I found the original design over at facetdiagrams.org, and it looks like the Australians have modified the design by reducing one line of cutting instructions on the top, the crown, and the bottom, the pavilion of the gemstone, which reduced the total number of facets from 37 on the original design down to 31 on the modified design. And you can bet that if the Australians have worked on the design and modified it, the modified design is going to work great and look great. So I think I'll give this design a try. When I finish cutting Dilemma, my citrine gemstone should look like this from the top, the side, and the bottom. I finished polishing the pavilion of our Bahia Citrine with cerium oxide on a tin lap, and I pre-polished it with my zinc lap and 8,000 grit diamond stick from Gearloose. I just, first time I've used my 8,000, or my zinc laps. I had two old zinc laps that oxidized and looked like, you know, the surface of the moon. And I had John Rolfe over at Gearloose resurface them for me. So now I've taken one of the resurfaced zinc laps and used 8,000 diamond on it. I'm going to take the bat lap that I was using with the 8,000 diamond and clean it up and either use the back side of it, or if I can clean it up and use the front side, I'm going to use that, I think, for aluminum oxide polishing. Hopefully I can get the front side cleaned up from all the 8,000 grit diamond that was on it. If not, again, the bat laps are solid, so you can use both sides of them. So I'm going to use the back side if I have to. Okay, I started preforming our Madeira Citrine with a 240 grit diamond, a topper lap. And I just went over it the second time, this time with a 360 grit topper lap. And a lot of times when you see me cutting stones, I don't worry about the temporary center point. And this design calls for a temporary center point for the first and second rows of instructions. And it matters on this stone. So when I cut the first go around with the the 200 rougher series lap just to kind of preform the stone. I didn't quite get a temporary center point. So then when I cut the girdle, I had a girdle lined up, but when I went back with my 360 grit topper and I made the center point, now my girdle's not lined up, of course. So with Dilemma, I think it is important to do the temporary center point right up front, because if you didn't, you wouldn't know how to line up your girdles. You could get your girdles to match now. If you didn't have this temporary center point, you could get your girdles to match by going to the first set of instructions, which are the 3 facets showing the girdle up a little higher. And you could just cut those first 3 instructions, bringing this girdle down to match, this one to match, and the third one to match. And then you would think that you're all in alignment, but you're not, because you don't have a temporary center point. You'd be out of alignment from the start. And although this looks like a round stone, it kind of is a round stone, the length to width measurement is not 1-to-1. On a perfectly round stone, it's 1-to-1, but the way they measure this stone and cut this stone, it's a 1.155 is the length to width ratio. And it's measured at the 96 index tooth. This, from there to there, is the width. The length, which is longer, is this to this, where those girdle facets meet. And you want to get that just right. If you don't, it's going to cause you some problems. So with this stone, do worry about the temporary center point. With a lot of designs, you don't need to worry about them. And so what I'll do now to get the girdle to line up is not bring these facets down, of course, on this facet. What I'll do instead is, at the girdle, there's 2 sets of girdle instructions, one for the 3 facets like this, and one for these 3 facets, like the lower ones. So these lower facets, that's instruction G2, I'll simply bring that girdle in. I'll grind those a little bit more on the girdle, so that'll bring this girdle up, this one, and this one. And I won't cut the final instruction yet, the P3, the 5th line of instruction, which is going to bring some facets down. We're not going to cut that yet with this rough of a lap, because it cuts fast, and if I cut it with the rough lap, it's going to be hard to get those scratches out with the next lap without cutting it down too far and then having to recut everything too many times. So I'll wait until I get a lot smoother of the laps in the pre-polish before I cut that final set of instruction, which makes a permanent center point. But again, since I already have a temporary center point to guide me, I think that'll help me stay in alignment. I finished polishing the pavilion of our Madeira Citrine, and it polished up beautifully with cerium oxide on the tin lap. Now I'll transfer it and cut the upper half of the stone. Okay, to transfer our stone, the first thing I do is get a paper towel and some denatured alcohol and clean the dop. It's already been cleaned. I keep my dops clean before I put them away, but just wipe it with the denatured alcohol and the stone to make sure there's no leftover residual swarf or anything on the stone that'll affect the adhesion. Then I get a small bit of modeling clay when I'm working with a stone that has a culet, and I'm transferring it to a dop that's a cone dop. And I take a little bit of that modeling clay and I put it in the very bottom of the cone dop, so that the very bottom doesn't have any brass, so the adhesive that I'm going to use is going to adhere to this modeling clay and my culet, and the rest of the adhesive that I use is going to adhere to the stone and the brass dop, but not on the culet. So that way when I take the dop off, I don't bear any risk of the culet breaking. Now to transfer this stone, I'm going to use 2-part epoxy, and I'm currently using the Devcon 2-part epoxy, which works great. I don't have any complaints with it. I had been using JB Weld for several years, and it's readily available in Home Depot, so the product also worked great. When this dries, it's still a little bit malleable, which was fine by me. In fact, it helped me remove the adhesive pretty easily, whereas the Devcon sets up like a rock and there's no bend to the plastic. Wasn't a problem, but some cutters said they thought the JB Weld might cause the stone to move or something when you're cutting it, which would be a disaster. Never happened, never had the problem, but I did decide to try the Devcon product, and it works great. It sets up hard as a rock. So the next step is to take the 2-part epoxy. I use a old business card because I have a lot of them. You can use anything. Some people use a credit card, a lid, anything you want. And you just want to put out a 50-50 mix. Just eyeball it and get it pretty much right. If you put too much down, you can scrape a little bit off before you start mixing it. But when you've got 2 puddles that look about the same, you've got a 50-50 mix. Now if that one on the right looks a little big, you could just take a little off. It's not going to cause a problem anyway, but you could remove a little bit and then call it a 50-50 mix. So then you mix the 2-part epoxy, the hardener and the resin together, and when you do that, you have about 2 minutes to put it onto the stone where you want it before it starts setting up. Don't worry about bubbles or anything. None of that's a problem. There's no issues. So once you've got it mixed up, you want to put it on your stone and the dot. So I generally want a little bit around the dop, all the way around the dop, so that the epoxy is going to adhere a little ways up the dop and onto the stone. Gently push the stone onto the dop, tighten your transfer fixture, turn it over so that with gravity the epoxy will run onto the stone, and just watch it. You don't want you want the epoxy to run onto the stone, but you don't want it to run down the side of the stone. It makes it hard to line up your girdles afterwards. And just move it back and forth a couple of times if you need to as the epoxy sets up. Okay, when we transfer our stone, this is our Bahia Citrine for our dilemma pattern or design. You want to make sure that you've got at the 96 tooth, and you set your armature at 90-degree angle, and you want the facet that has the 96 facet, which has the 2 on the other side, has the 2 last little facets going up. So it matters which stone, where you set it up on the transfer. Now, what you want to do is we've got this facet is a flat 90-degree facet, so we line it up, and as you raise and lower the armature, you want to make sure that light breaks right under that stone, all across the stone evenly at the same time. Not if one side has light showing and the other doesn't, you're a little bit off. So you just have to move the stone, left or right a little bit, and get it perfectly flush with your precision block. In this case, Ultratech gives you this block with the Ultratech. So once you get it so it's breaking the plane of that precision block all across the facet, across the straight line, you're flat, and that will ensure that the top part of the crown is lined up perfectly with the bottom part of the pavilion. And then you simply tighten up your set screw, which is right there, and you're ready to cut the upper half of the stone. Okay, I finished polishing the Bahia Citrine with cerium oxide and Kinlap. And we'll take that off the dop and put it in acetone and see what it looks like. Okay, normally what I do when I transfer my stones is just leave them, when I use two-part epoxy, leave it overnight, and the next day I work on it. But today I want to work on it the second half of the stone, the same day that I finished the first half. So a couple of very good cutters have told me that what they do is they put the stone in the oven, and that helps set the epoxy in just a matter of hours. So what they do is they bake 200, put the stone in the oven, close it up, and when it hits 200, they tell me they do is turn it off and leave everything in there as the oven cools back down to room temperature. And then at that point, it's apparently ready to facet. So I'm gonna give it a try. Don't tell BOPIE I'm using her oven, she'll have a fit. So again, when it gets up to 200, I will turn it off and leave everything in there. Okay, our oven has reached 200 degrees, so we will cancel and let it cool back down on its own, probably take an hour or so. Okay, let's see how our science experiment worked. So it's not sticky at all, it's hard. Normally after an hour it's still sticky, so it did harden up right away. So I guess the next step is to see if we can cut it. So I just started preforming the upper part, the crown of our Madeira Citrine with it's a 320 topper. So this is the first time I've ever used two-part epoxy and the same day started working on the stone. So I guess, well, putting it in the oven worked. So I'll continue to pre-polish or preform our Madeira Citrine. Okay, I finished polishing our Madeira Citrine, and now I'll put it in the acetone and soak it and see what it looks like, and then we'll weigh it and measure it. So today I used my zinc lap for the first time to pre-polish citrine, and I used it with 8000 grit diamond. Also today was the first time I tried using the technique of my oven to cure two-part epoxy quickly. It worked great, and instead of having to let the epoxy cure overnight, I was able to start cutting on the gemstone just a couple hours after applying the epoxy. I wish I could remember which great cutter told me that technique. It's certainly not, I certainly didn't discover it myself. It's from somebody else. And I wish I could give credit to where credit is due, but I don't recall who gave me that tip. As far as the dilemma design goes, it looks great, and it was a lot of fun to cut. A beginning cutter would enjoy cutting dilemma, but I would recommend that the cutter have at least 5 or 6 stones under his or her belt before tackling dilemma. For one thing, it's not quite a round gemstone. It has a length-to-width ratio of 1.155, so it's easy to get things a little bit off, and you may have to use your cheater to get everything to line up properly. But I don't think a new cutter would face major challenges with this design, so have fun and give it a try. If you do cut Dilemma either in the original design or the modified design, which I cut, please let me know how it turned out for you. I'd love to see what a gem in the original design looks like. And as always, happy fastening, everyone.